by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the largest business membership organization in the world, and something called the National Endowment for Democracy. And so we are at the cross sections of essentially governance and business. And this is what we primarily focus on in terms of around the world. So SIPA is currently working in 80 countries. It's actually now 26 in sub-Saharan Africa. We engage approximately 565 chambers, associations, and think tanks around the continent. We have 105 partners that we work with, 35 of whom are in Africa. And currently, SIPE has offices in 5 countries and a representative office in Zimbabwe. So our 5 countries that we have offices are Kenya, Ethiopia, and Sudan. We also have an office in Nigeria, and we're opening a new office in Mauritania. Next one, please. So in terms of our Africa strategy, SIPE Africa really is all about growing democracy and democratizing growth. We focus around 6 main areas: economic dialogue and entrepreneurship, the ecosystems for entrepreneurs. We heard about ecosystems for finance. What we do is, what does it take to start and grow a business in terms of the different continent? We work in the areas of digital economy. This is going to be something that is going to transform the opportunities and give African business the opportunity to leapfrog. So what does SIPE do in that? Well, we mostly work around the sort of the policy environment in different countries. We came up sort of with and helped the Ethiopian government develop their first digital economy sort of law in terms of Ethiopia. We work in this area called Business for Peace. What is the role of business in terms of reducing conflict? What is the role of business in terms of really building peace? And what is the role of business in terms of when we do have tragedy that strikes, what role should business play in terms of trying to grow business again in those conflict zones? So we can take a look at the work we're doing across the Sahel. That's really on economic transformation. How do we get into the conflict zones? How do we support specifically women entrepreneurs in terms of the ability to sustain their businesses more than anything else? Finally, we work on trade and inclusion. After CFTA came out, one of 2 things about CFTA: there's nothing in there on corruption, which is a problem, and there's nothing in there about democracy, which is another problem, because democracy is about essentially good governance, transparency, and accountability. So these are some things that we're doing, but what are we doing? We're linking something that is government to government, all of this nice mumbo jumbo about creating the largest market in terms of Africa. But we are now linking what is a government initiative down to the grassroots, to what businesses, especially small businesses, can do to take advantage or opportunities of that. And then finally, we're in this area called accountability and governance and integrity. We used to call it anti-corruption, but anti-corruption is a bad word. So we don't talk about anti-corruption. I'll try to use it a lot less now. We talk about accountability, integrity, and good governance. Next one, please. So I keep on talking about what is the whole point of what we're doing. We are trying to increase the economic cost of corruption and reduce sort of the existential cost of integrity. So as we think about what our mission is in terms of our efforts across Africa, it's really about promoting integrity and reducing and raising the cost of corruption. Because right now, when I keep on talking about why corruption, it pays to be corrupt in Africa, what it comes down to is that right now businesses are making a calculations, owners are making a calculations, we can pretend it's about that they don't know, but they're making a calculation that this is a short-term gain, is well worth it, in order for them to get a benefit out of a transaction, and that they don't have to worry about this long term. But we know that's not the case. So what we're trying to do is educate, we're trying to empower, and we're trying to mobilize the business community to really adopt integrity and business ethics. Next one. All right. So let's talk about this. We have 1.2 billion population in the continent. This is the real key. You have 750 million businesses representing 40% of the continental GDP. You have an 88 billion investment in infrastructure. And then you have 120 million plus mobile money active users, 50% of the global population, when we take a look at that. So when we see what the opportunities are for the African markets, we're looking at a 3 trillion growth potential under a CFTA. All of these are great things. This is all part of the message that I communicate about Africa rising, right? About the opportunities across the continent. And again, we keep on talking about Africa, but you are made up of 55 different countries. So, or 54, 55, depending on how we count. But it is truly important that we begin to consider and we take a look at break this down in terms of talking about Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo. We take a look at the different markets and we begin to understand the dynamics. So let's talk about what are some of the challenges. All right, 80% of FCPA and UK Bribery Act are not going against US companies, they're not going against British companies. Most of them actually are going against foreign companies, right? These are large companies that have something to lose. That's one important thing. So when they started 20 years ago, or UK 10 years ago, they started to go after US and British companies. Now that's no longer the case. Most of the cases, forget that statistic about 80%, most of the cases are related about going after countries or businesses that are located and habitate outside of the United States or the UK. So that's an important thing to remember. Then when we take most, I'd say 90% of them, then when we start to take a look at FCPA, UK Bribery Act, they involve third-party suppliers, all right? So large firms do not have a problem, large firms do not have a problem in terms of corporate compliance. They have the systems, whether they follow them or not is another question we can talk about, but they have the systems, they have corporate governance systems in place, they have a culture and a history of this. I can recall when I lived in Angola, that I can promise you, and I was building the supply chain for small business in Angola, okay? The large foreign companies in Angola were never requested to pay a bribe that I know of, okay? They had a reputation. The officials wouldn't go and ask them for bribes because of their reputation. They knew they were not going to be successful getting a bribe. That means that doesn't mean that, as we'll see through some scandals, that this doesn't always happen. But as you go down the supply chain, where most of the business is done, the 80%, the third-party suppliers, that is where all of the bribery was in the Angolan oil and gas market. Right? How do I know? Because I worked with about 90% of the Angolan SMEs that were trying to break into the oil and gas industry and supply chain. So I know where the corruption was in Angola. And you know, even some of these recent scandals through the Panama Papers and going after Isabella dos Santos and some of those types of scandals we've read about, that's just one small portion of all of the type of corruption risk that occurred in that market. So we know by conservative estimates, if you want to have something that says how much, I keep on trying to get my Kenyan friends to tell me how much they pay. You say, how much, I got the question, how much is actually paid? Well, if we go by the World Bank study, which is what everybody has to use because it's very hard to get these real numbers, except for, of course, my friends at PwC, you have a situation where we can pass a red face test and approximately say across the world it's about 10%. In those countries that are considered to be more corrupt, it's probably higher. In those that are considered to be less corrupt, it's probably lower. But on average, 10% is lost towards corruption. In Africa, when we take a look at this through illicit financial flows, for all my friends in the banking industry, we're taking a look at 148 billion that is lost either through nefarious means or through the banking sector or through multinationals trying to essentially not pay domestic taxes. And then when we take a look just at the Afrobarometer, 1 in 3. So we've heard some of the numbers from Peter. So usually we see weak governance associated with high corruption. All right? And so as you can see through CPI, the Transparency International, and sort of their heat map, when we start to take a look at this, we have, you know, pretty, across the continent, we only have a few bright spots, if any, in terms of where these things are. I don't know when this was from, but I mean, TI comes out with this every 2019. So this is a little bit old. So I'm not going to read this out to you, but let's talk about some of the things. Actually, these are a little bit dated in terms of the slide. No, no, it's not. So in the last couple of years, we have ABB $462 million fine or settlement as a deferred prosecution agreement in South Africa. We have Glencore, which many of you might have read about in the last year, agreed to pay US $314 million in the UK, $700 million in the US. These involve multiple countries, including bribing officials in Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Equatorial Guinea, Brazil, Venezuela, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Credit Suisse paid $100 million. We wonder why they were in trouble and recently sold. In disgorgement for violations in Mozambique and South Africa. Okay, this is part of what helped bring down Credit Suisse in the last 2 weeks. McKinsey and Company, so we even look at our consulting firms, agreed to pay back $63 million in terms of a corruption investigation in South Africa. UK Bribery Act, let's talk about some of the other things. Standard Bank, PLC, $16.8 million in terms of a financial penalty to the government of Tanzania. Rolls-Royce, £258 million paid to the UK and Brazilian authorities. Airbus, Amic Foster Wheeler. I bring these up because this is not some problem that keeps on going away. And you see big firms constantly. I told you about how big firms don't get involved and don't pay bribes. This is what happens when they don't follow their own rules and they don't adopt strong compliance structures. Next. And these are some of the more older ones that we like to talk about. Again, you'll see oil, tobacco, well, your British American tobacco, I think that was even related to Kenya, not paying taxes, and also, and here we go, government officials in Burundi, Rwanda, and Comoros. Okay, so we even see Rwanda has finally popped up in this map of shame in terms of who's been involved. These are bad things for bad reputations. Not only do these firms suffer, but the countries in which they get accused and the businesses in those countries then end up having to pay higher costs of borrowing money, and they have to try to work harder to find international partners and investors. Next. All right, so let's talk about why do people get engaged in corruption. So we have another one of our main programs around this is in Nigeria, and I'll tell you one of the success stories of how we got business, civil society, and the private sector to work together. So when we take a look at drivers of corruption in Nigeria, this was, I think, done by the Lagos Business School. It's essentially around greed. Clearly, it's for profit. People want to get a gain. Interesting enough, peer pressure. Everybody's doing it, so I'm going to do it. There's also up there fear of harm, despair in terms of fear of poverty, and anger against the systems. These are why people engage in corruption in terms of our friends in Nigeria. So let's talk about what did work. Okay, thinking about this. So several years ago, we got involved in a project with the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, where we started to do, and I'm telling you this story because this is what all of you can do, especially my colleagues over there at PSF. And we called this survey Cost of Doing Business, and what we were looking at was the difficulty businesses had in terms of working with ministries, regulators, and others. Underlying all of this was whether there were opportunities in there for corruption. And so they come out and they now have decided to do this on an annual basis. They do a survey of the business community, which has some questions like how much did you end up paying in bribes and all of that, which some of us, we don't talk about in terms of what the businesses, I'm not allowed to say, in terms of those types of surveys. But what we do come and they do publish is sort of a heat map of those ministries or regulators that are creating the most problems. So then there's two approaches in terms of what you do next. There is the name and shame approach. You publish this and you put this into the press and you say these people are bad in the government. They're bad. They're taking bribes. They're making us, our businesses suffer and all of that. So there's a name and shame. Or there is the other approach, which is mostly around working together to create a successful outcome. All right? And so this is what we decided to do in terms of changing the strategy. So before we even do anything with this information, we then go into those agencies that are the worst offenders, and we talk about what we can do to work together to solve the problem. Okay? And the business community comes up with specific recommendations that they say that the regulatory agency, the ministry, should adopt that will get rid of some of these problems. Then, after the agencies agree and have begun to potentially implement it, we hold this public event where then we come out and we publish the results of the survey and we say these are the results, these are the most difficult agencies, regulatory bodies to work with. And then the heads of the regulatory bodies get up there and they say, yes, we recognize we have a problem. Thank you very much for working together to help us solve those problems. And this is what we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to solve those problems. Now, do we let them off the hook? No, we track them. In the course of the next year before the next survey, did they follow through on implementing those changes? Sometimes, as we frequently have, there's a lot of talk and no action. So what do we do at that point? At that point, we go in and we talk to their bosses. We talk to the vice president's office. We talk to other government agencies. And we also go to the press. And we say that they've made a commitment, but they're not really working on it. So what is the result of all of this? As we've gone through this process several times, we have found that the worst offending agencies are typically, for the next 3 to 5 years, the best agencies in our annual surveys. So we constantly work with the ones at the bottom, and it's a win-win situation for government, for the private sector, for business, and for the business associations. So this is an example of collective action. All right, so we were introduced to ethics first. Next one. So ethics first, and I'll get into what it is, but let's talk about it. We're talking about corruption as a crime, but let's talk about sort of cooperation, compliance, collaboration in terms of what business can do to help solve these problems. Let's talk about, instead of saying let's follow all of the rules, let's do our own self-regulation internal to the firm to try to correct mistakes and improve in terms of our process, policies, and procedures. Let's focus on data. Let's come up with the numbers so that we can actually count the cost of corruption. And let's think of business in terms of a partner in terms of solving these problems. All right? Let's not think of public officials or the government as the enemy. Let's try to work together to remove barriers. Next. Okay. Members, of which I've just mentioned here in Rwanda, work with and through KIAC. So we have a strategic partner in the country, and they're all independent to CIPE. We don't set this up through our own CIPE network. And what we're doing is we are providing consultants. We are providing consultants that can offer training. They can, for all of the firms, small, medium, and large, they can offer around anti-corruption compliance. They can offer consulting as firms are trying to build up their compliance services. And they are offering auditing type of services. Now,
Why did we do that? Because as we took risk management, compliance, this field of what we're talking about, is the fastest growing consulting business in the United States. If I was going to advise somebody going into business school now what they should get involved in, I would probably tell them you want to get involved in risk management. It across all of the business functions. It gets you right in front of the CEO and the board of directors. And it is a growing field that is only growing every year in terms of the number of people getting involved in terms of risk management. Reverse that, and I take a look at the continent, on the continent, because they're family-owned firms, because there's not a strong culture of corporate compliance or corporate governance, what we end up having is only a few firms offering these services, typically in different African markets, right? So I don't want to come in and crowd those people who are already offering these services. What I want to do is say, we need to cater to the whole market. So SIPE is specifically focused on the medium, small, and micro. Because when you take a look at a lot of the compliance best practices, these make a lot of sense for the largest type of firms. They tell you, hire compliance officials. Well, if I'm a small firm and I only have 3 employees, why would I hire somebody in compliance? Right? So we have adapted some of the best practices to cater to small, medium, and they can be for large. We do have experience working for large. All right? So what I found was it was really around these issues. So what it does is it gives small and medium firms the ability to collect all of this information and have it in one place. So when they get asked by companies for this information, then they can possibly use it. Who's going to ask them for this information? All the multinationals should be asking them for this information. So you don't even have to go and say it's going to be US or European. Any multinational should be going through this process in terms of third-party suppliers. All right, so you can go through this process, and now we have 3 different standards. It's free. You can go and sign up tomorrow. You can work with our partners at KIAC in terms of all of this. Green, we have different, do we evaluate companies and say these companies are ethical and they're completely clean? No, we would be, in the United States, I'd be sued within probably half an hour. We say, okay, as business leaders, sign an integrity pledge. We agree, leadership from the top. We agree we're not going to engage in corruption. Silver, you go through a diagnostic. All right, and then as that diagnostic comes out, it shows you some of your strengths and some of your weaknesses, and you essentially, through Silver, self-report. We have done our diagnostic, we have found certain things that need to be fixed, and we've worked on them, and we've achieved them. And you get to Silver. Gold is, okay, prove it. So we'll get a third independent party to come in and do an audit, and that audit report will be available. What is the value of all of this? It's going to attract finance, it's going to attract partnerships, it's going to attract multinational customers. It's going to be a quicker solution for all of that. So what have we achieved? We really started this in November. I mean, Ethics First as a database has been around for a year and a half, but in November we decided to go through working, especially in 2 test markets, Nigeria and Kenya. We now have 480 users. Is that sexy? Can I go and start selling those companies? Not yet. When I get to 5,000, that's when I activate the networks that I've developed and who SIPE is with the Chambers of Commerce, not only across Africa, but also across, I said I was part of the US Chamber of Commerce. So through SIPE, you will have access, perhaps, to 3 million US companies of only, I promise you, a small portion is looking at the African market to do business. But still, I'm the best way for you to get access to that. And we're now, we have compliance experts, in 24 countries, 20 are in Africa. You can see here some of the stats really from November in terms of what we're doing. Again, you can come and take a picture of this. They'll send you right towards Ethics First. Next. Okay, so before you ask me, did I pay him? No. So we have now champions and ambassadors of this in many different countries, and we have a ton of these that we could show to you in terms of some testimonials. This is not necessarily talking about what Ethics First really has done for them yet, because it really hasn't frankly done very much, except given them the ability to collect important information that they need either for an audit or the information that their potential domestic and foreign partners. So let me conclude on this. What can you do? You, if you are in the financial services industry or the financial industry, have a strong culture of compliance. So it's your duty, going back to what I was talking about in terms of Kennedy, to essentially think about how can you not only serve your banks, but how can you serve the community. So you can do this by partnering with KIAC and SIPE and others in terms of allowing us to work with your customers in terms of that. Secondly, you as compliance experts can, so what we did was we found that there are compliance clubs around Africa. These are compliance officials, especially in Kenya, talking to themselves. So we mobilize them to say, forget just talking to yourselves. Come out and talk to the business community. So we've given them platforms for them to actually do that, okay? So as financial experts, you can talk about that. We have worked with investors and banks, specifically to think about not only their customers, but more broadly speaking about why that environment is so critical in terms of trying to reduce the cost of borrowing across the continent. So that's one in terms of what you can do in terms of partnering with us. Chambers of Commerce and Business Associations, let us help you improve your own corporate governance within your associations, but even more importantly, through your members, partner with KIAC in terms of, as an association or chamber, you have three main services, right? Don't forget this. Your first thing is to provide information. So use our ABIN network, use KIAC to share information with your members, okay? The second thing to do is to network. So Ethics First provides you an opportunity to promote your companies, but also in your member companies, but it also offers you an ability to network them beyond just the internal network within your chambers or associations. It's going to give you eventually access to that network that has cost me so much time and energy and travel of trying to get to, and my colleagues at SIPE, to get to know 565 chambers and associations across the continent. And it will give you, as I told you, access to the chamber network within the United States and, frankly, across the UK and France and Germany, where we also have a strong relationship and presence. And also through the International Chamber of Commerce, which is essentially the governing body. All right, so when we talk about that, the third thing is insurance. That's why you are chambers and associations. That's the third thing that chambers and associations do. And I don't talk about you selling insurance. You are essentially the person of last resort when there are business issues and business problems, either individual to companies or to the whole sector. And so as that, you are essentially the people who connect with government and recommend to government what they need to do to create a better enabling environment. You're also helping companies that are in trouble find solutions. And so there are going to always be corruption scandals everywhere in the world. It's not something that's unique. But as leaders of business chambers and associations, this is one of the things that you can do to build sustainable members. And what's in it for you? If you have members that are around in 5, 10, 15, 20 years and they continue to grow, then that means your chambers and associations, at least through your membership and the services you provide, will continue to grow. You're only as healthy as the businesses that you support and you cater to. How else? In terms of this, we're a disinterested third party. All right? We're in this because what I want to do and what we want to do at SITE is to improve the reputation of individual countries. What we want to do is empower, mobilize the business communities to actually get engaged on this, and we want to improve corporate governance. We do know that in terms of this, in terms of concluding, that that the future of this is an exciting time to be on the continent. This is in Rwanda is an exciting time to be in Rwanda in terms of your opportunities. So this can set companies on the correct path forward that will guarantee their sustainability and their growth. And so partnering with KIAC and SIPE, again, third-party, disinterested parties, we can work together to sort of continue. You already have a good reputation, right? Don't ruin it like many other countries have done by the corruption scandals that come out. If you want to continue with the CFTA and the opportunities, you're going to have to create it's a new way of doing business. We have to think there's going to be more competition, but we also have to think about what is the comparative advantage? What makes me different? How do I provide better quality services and products as business leaders? And I can promise you one of the comparative advantages that you should be paying attention to is business ethics and integrity. So I'll end there. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. And thank you for facilitating my session. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just wanted, this presentation was very interesting and it's very useful, and maybe we shall test it in the future in the activities that we are going to conduct. But I just want to hear from Lars as just a take-home knowledge in one sentence. How really, what would you recommend to each of us here to take like a take-home assignment on the use of ethic first in our daily activities?
Okay. So, ethics first, if you're not in ethics first, it costs you nothing to sign up. So if you have a business, you should go and sign up immediately in terms of that. It doesn't cost you anything to recommend to others to do it. So our guarantee is we're never going to put out a cost there. Let's talk about information privacy. We're not going to share information in this database on any single company without your express permission, right? So that's another guarantee in terms of that. At a certain point, we will be coming out to you when we're ready to promote the companies in this database, saying we want your permission to be able to list you in terms of the ethics first as a company. It is a place for you to store your documents and safely store your documents, because you will be asked for a lot of this from banks. If you're going to get loans, you'll be asked from auditors for this information. You'll be asked from customers, meaning multinationals, or perhaps you will be asked by large, it doesn't even have to be a multinational, large African firm will ask you for this information because they have to follow the same culture and process and control. So ethics first, you should all go and sign up if you have a company for ethics first. If you are the leader of a chamber or association, you should recommend the companies sign up for ethics first. I can promise you that it's generally not sufficient, all right? Let me be honest. I told you, you could go in there as long as you were diligent and you were committed. You could go in there and go through a process of building up your compliance system. What makes this unique? What makes it unique is it's not for the largest firms. This is specifically designed for medium and small firms. We're not going to propose to you ever that you go in and hire compliance people. If you get to be big enough and your business has grown so much, then you, of course, will think about that, but we're not going to be the ones to recommend it. We recommend that specific functions are given to others. We give you ideas on how to set this up. We want you to educate your boards on what we've been talking about. We want you to adopt. So what you can immediately do in terms of this is go home and do that. If you're an association or chamber, reach out to SIPE and KIAC and say, how can we partner together? Why? We don't have any ownership under business ethics and integrity in Rwanda. We could care less. But you as business leaders and as business chambers and associations and as PSF, this is going to be good for your own brand. And so partner with us in terms of sharing this information with your members and help us and help yourselves build up a stronger compliance culture within Rwandan areas. Again, this is a strategic partnership that doesn't really, it has no cost to it. So there's only win-win-win. It's going to be a win for you, it's going to, in your association, it's going to be a win for your member companies, and it will be a win for clearly KIAC and SIPE as we're able to register more forums. So that's what I propose that we do. And think and give us opportunities. You have events, you have different times when you want people to come in and speak about business ethics and integrity. And you don't have to listen to my English all the time. You at least will have Rwandan experts that can come in, as you saw, to explain what is compliance, what is the importance of good corporate governance, what is the importance of business ethics and integrity, right? And then finally, if you think about this, not only are you partnering with a premier institution within Rwanda, you have the opportunities to partner with an international organization that is going to give you new access and new opportunities as we build this network of people committed to business ethics and integrity.
Thank you, Lars.